anything I do, all the work I do is around development for people. And I like to start off with 2 questions. And those 2 questions are, number 1, how do you show up in the world? And number 2 is, how does that impact other people? We've got to know the answers to those questions because that directly impacts the relationships we have moving forward, what gets done from those relationships, how people treat us, and then in return, how we actually treat them, right? Once we get treated a certain way, then we respond usually in kind in some way. Have you ever walked through a whole day where you're just like this and you're walking fast and you're showing up everywhere and you know you're, let's call it tense, but can you put more of a name to it? Are you frustrated or are you disappointed? Are you angry or are you anxious? So finding out, do we have emotional vocabulary within us, that tends to be a big piece of emotional intelligence. Do I know what I'm going through in the moment I'm going through it? It can be really helpful for us to think of specific triggers that we have so we know we need to be a little bit more aware of, right? I'll give you a very quick example. My dad actually lives down here in Florida, and I live up in Boston. So, we talk on the phone when we can. I travel for work. I'm usually all over. We don't have a very set schedule on how often we talk. So sometimes I'll call and I'll be like, hey, Dad. And he says, oh, how nice of you to squeeze me in. Right? That's a trigger. Yet, I have a decision about how I can react. And if I respond with love and like, yeah, I'm so glad I caught you, that's a longer, more quality-filled conversation. Right? If I'm like, yeah, I might not catch you till 2020, good luck. Sarcasm is one of my defaults. I'm going to own that. Right? That's a shorter conversation about the weather. So I can blame him because he sometimes responds poorly. But what do you think my dad really wants? He wants to hear from me, right? So if I can get back to his intention instead of his impact, because my dad doesn't know how to say, oh my gosh, I wish you'd call more. That's just not his thing. He's 72 years old and he's not going to say that. So I have to be ready, like, oh, and I call him, wow, he might say something sarcastic. He might say something a little hurtful, but what he really wants, his intention is that he wants to connect with me. I'll tell you the number 1 default behavior that every single one of us has been guilty of, defensiveness. Defensiveness. Now, defensiveness makes a lot of sense to our brain, right? Because if your amygdala is saying, hey, you're not safe, you want to defend yourself, right? So you'll say, no, that isn't what happened. No, that isn't what I meant. The challenge with defensiveness, even though we think we're doing a service for ourselves, we're shutting down that other person, right? Maybe someone has been bold to give us some feedback, and if our response is, no, you're wrong, all of a sudden we're not very good listeners, all of a sudden we're not very responsive, and we've also screwed ourselves over for the future, because what's the chances that person's going to give us feedback again? Think of someone in your life right now, just in your brain, that you know values you and appreciates you. Someone in your work life, someone that values you and appreciates you. Yes, they're here. Now, maybe this is the easier exercise. Think of someone who you really don't think values and appreciates the work you do. In your brain, think of the difference of what you would do for those 2 people. Right? If the one that you feel valued by said, oh my gosh, I need you for 15 extra minutes today, you likely to do it? Absolutely. That person that you don't feel valued by? Sorry, busy. Got to catch the bus. Making dinner, whatever. Right? We do different things. And appreciation is a beautiful step in building a bridge to emotional connection. Because at the end of the day, emotional connection is when someone else sees you and starts to know you in a way so they start to know what you need and what you care about and what your concerns are. So at the very end of the day, right, we can ask ourselves, who am I be feeling valued by and appreciated by? But the more important question is to turn it around. How do I value and appreciate the people in my world? And this is outside of work as well. How do I value and appreciate? Oh, I'm sure they know. Oh, I'm sure I said thank you. Or, think of all the different ways we can value and appreciate people. It can go a long way in building this piece of emotional connection that builds a stronger foundation for our relationships.